Hello and welcome guys to another video of Carbon Market Insider, the podcast where we have people of inside the carbon markets to talk about their companies, to explain a bit of insights in the carbon markets. And if you enjoy content like this, then please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel where you will stay up to date about the news of the carbon markets. Today we talk with Marcel Eichler from Carbonfuture.earth, which is a very interesting German company who focuses on carbon removals via biochar. So not only carbon offsets, but carbon removals. He will explain a bit about his company and about the surroundings of it. I think it was a very interesting interview. The company Carbonfuture.earth is the company Carbonfuture.earth is due to another funding round. So if you have higher sums to invest, you can invest in it. But this will be for bigger investment only. This is not the main reason I have him on a podcast. I thought that the topic of biochar in carbon credits was very interesting, and that's why I asked him to come on the podcast. So please enjoy the video with Marcel Eichler of Carbonfuture.earth. Hello and welcome guys to another episode of Carbon Market Insider, the podcast format of Carbon Market News, where we talk to people inside the carbon market. Today we are here with Marcel Eichler. Is that your name? Yes.
Yes, that's my name.
From Carbonfuture.earth. He will be presenting his company, and we're going to talk a bit about the carbon market in general, how he sees developments, and he will let us know some insider details. So I don't know, Marcel, take it from here, talk a bit about your company, and let's go.
Maybe I start with a little introduction about myself and
Perfect,
then introduce the company right away. So I actually joined the company right from the start. So basically, I was the first employee of the company. We are operative since last year, and basically they snatched me away from university right after I graduated. Before I did my master's degree in environmental governance at the University of Freiburg. And I was also mainly in charge of doing the sustainability report for the university, which was a 2 years project. So I have a background in carbon accounting and life cycle assessment. That's what I specialized in. And right after university, I basically deep dived into the field of carbon removals and particularly biochar together with Carbonfuture. Which brings me right to the idea of the company was, as you might know, the entire market of carbon removals, it's entirely new. It's basically the foundation of still reaching the 1.2 degree target according to the IPCC, but the entire market basically exists since 2-3 years, and that brings me maybe to the first important topic. You always got to distinguish between emission avoidances and carbon removal. And with carbon removals, basically you have a limited amount of technologies and solutions that are available at the moment, and some are more developed than others. And Carbonfuture is a company that specializes solely on carbon removal credits and the accreditation of such. And our major use case at the moment is biochar.
And why did your company choose biochar? Was it from the beginning the plan, or did you more fell into it when you looked at it, or how did that come about?
The idea came from our two founders, and they actually developed together basically the scientific foundation of the methodology for biochar somewhat in a white paper, also together with Hans-Jörg Lerchenmüller, who is one of our co-founders. The European Biochar Certificate was mainly involved with in this, together with Hans-Peter Schmidt. How to basically make this traceable and marketable. And biochar in the field of carbon removals is some kind of a sweet spot. so to say, because the technical solution, pyrolysis, is readily available and can be scaled already. It's traceable because you can track the biomass from it being harvested through the processing until the end use, where it's being applied, for example, in soil as soil amendment or in long-lasting materials. So you can cover the whole supply chain with the tracking system and basically really have proper quantification by deducting all the process emissions that occurred until the supply chain. And you can fairly predict the permanence of the material, for example, in soil. And if you assume a conservative degradation rate, you really know how much CO2 has been extracted from the atmosphere through biochar. So basically, biochar represents a sweet spot in the carbon removal market right now. Because it's scalable, it's permanent, and it's traceable.
Yeah, it was quite interesting because I did not read a lot about your company before, and yesterday I sat down and read, and I was like, okay, well, biochar, because I have a bit of background also in renewable energies and also renewable agriculture, and I was like, okay, well, that's a nice idea, and as a matter of fact, because like you say, it's also not a very complicated technology. But what would you say, like, these are some of the how do you say good things about biochar? What are some of the complications in working with this technology, or what would be, like, more of the, let's say, downside or complications would be interesting.
I mean, from a theoretical standpoint, as you already mentioned, it's actually fairly easy and simply like problems you encounter more in the real world, in the business world. But from a civic point of view, you basically need residual biomass, for example, with wood or agricultural waste. And I mean, there's a fair share of biomass that is mainly being unused, for example, landfilled, incinerated, or burned on the field in open fires. And particularly this kind of biomass that has a higher lignin content, which is mainly for example, in wood, responsible for the woody structure, together with cellulose. And this kind of biomass, it's very much suitable for producing biochar, and it's also readily available. So
just one second, maybe we could. Sorry. Maybe we could just explain what biochar is and how do you make it, maybe just for the audience, because I was like, well, I know, but maybe people don't know. So
yeah, I'm coming to this.
Yeah,
I just wanted to cover
I just realized
the biomass first, since it comes first. So since it's a byproduct, it can be considered C neutral. And if you use this biomass in a pyrolysis machine in order to produce biochar, it's basically a thermochemical process in an low oxygen environment. And in this, by doing this, you can produce, of course, heat energy and also electricity if you have an engine. But the second product, so to say, next to the energy is the biochar, which is basically some sort of charcoal in the end. It has slightly different properties, but I mean, the technology is hundreds of years old.
Yes.
Even like in Latin America, they did this in order to do the terra preta. By basically going through this process in a low oxygen environment, you stabilize the carbon in the biochar. You have some volatile carbon molecules which decompose in the soil through microbiotic digestion, but you also have the very stable components which basically remain similar to other coal products, stable for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. And other byproducts from the pyrolysis might also be, for example, bio-oil or syngases. But this kind of depends on the pyrolysis technology. there are different kinds of pyrolysis technology. I mean, the more important part at this point is that it's basically a thermochemical conversion of biomass and just fixing the carbon and then producing charcoal-like substance.
Yes. To say it's very simply, I always thought of it to burn wood or biomass without actually burning it in secondary.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
heating it up very to a very high temperature, but without oxygen and not really
it's
burning it or something.
more like baking, so to
Yeah,
say.
yeah, exactly. Baking wood.
But
Yes.
baking biomass,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
perfect.
once the biomass is baked, you don't need external energy anymore. The
Yes.
process runs on itself, and you even have excess energy that you can use, for example, in a local heating network or to dry the biomass. And then you still get the biochar as an end product.
Yes. You spoke about business challenges. What are some of the business challenges with the product, with the credits, with the producing of the biochar, or what are some of the challenges, would you say?
I mean, the real world challenge is the carbon preserving application, because you have technology available, you have the biomass available. But the issue is, of course, I mean, biochar is the product. It comes with a value and has a lot of co-benefits, for example, in agriculture. And but applying it as such is actually a difficulty. I mean, agriculture is a very conservative
Yes.
sector. So bringing in a new product and saying, okay, it's good for your soil if you do it like this, you know, it's people are somewhat reluctant to do this. Also open for change. Like coming in and saying you can use this and reduce the amount of fertilizer you need and improves your soil environment. So it's like this general, I mean, for example, in agriculture, people being reluctant to change.
Yes.
So um, um, then the second point is, of course, I mean, it's like for example, through the carbon credits, it's not sufficient to even at least in Europe to cover the production costs of the
Okay.
biochar. So on the market, it's being traded for. Yeah, it really depends between 400, 800, sometimes even 1,000 euros. Depends on the per ton of
Per ton,
biochar.
yeah.
Also depends on the quality, of course, of the biochar. So I mean, there's the willingness to pay for the biochar. I mean, for a product that hasn't been used before. I mean, you can subsidize it and scale it and make it more widely available, for example, through the carbon credits, but you still need some education on the side of the end user. And then the second part is we need the confirmation of the end use, of course, because until it's not mixed into a soil substrate, for example, or applied in the field or in material, it still can be burned. So it has a sink potential at factory gate, but it's only a sink once it's being applied in a way that it can't be burned anymore. So we need this confirmation of the end use, and that's also something that can only be done by the end user. I mean, and not every end user or potential client is willing to participate in the scheme and use our platform or give a signature or agree that he's using the biochar in a carbon preserving way. Because it's, I mean, our platform works on a digital basis, and sometimes it's also hard to convince people to participate in this digital scheme. So there's a lot of education to do on the side of the final application of the biochar.
So for someone to work with you, they have to basically go the whole supply chain, work from the producer to the end user, and this is basically the process that you how do you say, support or overview in your company.
It works twofold. So basically, the LCA biomass production and harvesting until factory gate, until production of the of the biochar is covered by the European Biochar Certificate. So each of the production facilities that work with us are EBC certified. So, and there are two requirements. First, that the biochar fulfills the do no harm principle. So it's checked for heavy metal contaminations, organic contaminations, such as pH values, and then it's being certified that it can be safely applied, for example, as feed additive or in organic agriculture. And the second part is the EBC sync, which is the life cycle assessment, and then the batch is being assigned a sync potential. And what we in Carbonfuture do as EBC accredited trader is we track, based on the EBC data that they provide to us, we track each delivery until its end use. And the system boundary, so to say, is when the biochar reaches a stable matrix, so it can't be burned anymore. And that is either agriculture application or soil substrate or long-lasting material. And then we upload basically the delivery onto our platform and can assign a sync value after deducting all supply chain emissions, also the transport that occurs after the factory gate. So we need a lot of data points
Yes.
that have to come together before actually issuing a credit.
Yeah, that sounds nice. How are with what kind of customers do you work? Is it more like private individuals that come to you, or is it also corporations? I saw you had the Klarna payment system that works
Yeah,
with you now. So maybe you could talk a bit about that.
it's mostly corporations.
Okay.
We also don't really target individual customers. I mean, of course, they're very welcome and we're happy to do, but also I think the idea is that, at least from our side, is that major responsibility also lies with larger entities and corporations, and not necessarily with the individual. And also the price for the carbon credits is it's quite high. I
What is
mean,
your
it's
selling price around?
last year on the spot market, it was 100 euros per ton of
Okay.
CO2 equivalent plus VAT.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you look at the market, for example, at atmosphere, what people are buying to compensate their flights, it's in the range of 20 euros.
Yes. And it goes even cheaper sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that MICE is a nice feature for an individual, but like for corporations, I mean, we believe that you need quality removals. So what you emit has also to be extracted again from the atmosphere. You need a clear reduction path as a corporate customer. And yeah, the price needs to be higher because higher prices give you an incentive also to reduce your own emissions from just basic economic point of view. And like by compensating your own emissions, we are €5 credits doesn't really give you an incentive to further reduce your own emissions, at least from an economic point of view. And the price is also more realistic, like when we see, for example, the Umweltbundesamt, so the Ministry for Environment, has a price like calculated that each ton of CO2 causes 180 euros of damage to society. I mean, it's of course this price also depends on the methodology they use, but it is actually a realistic price for our society. And the price for carbon removal credits should reflect this somehow. And then again, on the supply side, this is a price we need in order to make the technology scalable and make biochar more widely available, for example, to farmers and to other projects.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in general, the we have to distinguish between the carbon avoidance and removal. And in general, the removal is the much higher quality carbon or carbon credit, and is also in general a higher price. I think the other way is the carbon capture and storage. I don't know if any of how many removal technologies there are, but in general, the prices of those technologies are higher as far as I
Yeah.
researched it. But
I
the
mean,
quality is also higher. So
yeah, that's usually a case because it's properly quantifiable, at least
yes,
the technical solutions.
yes,
I
yes,
mean, with biochar, you can cover the whole supply chain. With
yes,
carbon capture and storage, you can actually measure how much CO2 has been extracted, and then you have to deduct the emissions, for example, from the plant and the indirect emissions from building the plant. But the CO2 itself that is extracted can be accurately measured. That is the huge advantage of the technological solutions, whereas emission avoidances are always based on a hypothetical
yes,
baseline. What would have happened if I didn't introduce that kind of project?
yes. That is exactly.
And you also have the nature-based carbon removals, which is, for example, um, uh, forestry. But
Mhm.
there you always have a problem with permanence. You can't guarantee how long the carbon remains fixed until it enters the natural carbon cycle again. And then with the nature-based solutions, you also have the problem that, I mean, for example, particularly when it comes to forest, like you have a lot of ecosystem services
Mhm.
that come with the forest, and only looking at CO2 falls basically short. I mean, depending on the composition of the forest, you can improve the water cycle, you can improve biodiversity, and these are all like aspects that should actually flow into the value of a credit that comes from forestry. So it's very complex and also very hard to estimate what is the quality of the forestry project. You really have to look deep into it in order to give a good judgment.
Mhm. Would you say that most nature-based solutions credits are underpriced, or is it fairly priced, or how would you see that from the outside?
Mm, I think a lot of forestry projects just fall short in terms of what should deliver
Mhm.
because they only look at the carbon aspect of the forestry. And then, of course, sometimes, like, I mean, a forest is building up carbon over time, and then
Yes.
it's actually declining again at some point. And what often is sold within forestry projects is basically what the highest point of carbon sequestration in the for the area that is being reforested, for example. But since it's a living system, you should actually have the average sequestration of the forest over, let's say, 20 years. And it's hard also to guarantee that the forest will remain intact for a longer period than
Exactly.
20
Yeah.
years because you might have a policy shift, you might have a forest fire. So yeah, I mean, the claims that are being made are somewhat too bold,
Mhm.
and then from my point of view, a lot of times, other ecosystem services are neglected too much. I mean, I don't wanna trash forest projects at this point because I think they're super important,
Mhm.
and it's a solution we need, but, the standards on the market should be more stringent when it comes to forest projects. That at least my point of view.
Mhm. And it might also encourage maybe also a switch into other technologies, because if the carbon credits from forest projects or so are maybe a bit more expensive, then it's not such a big difference between one technology or the other. And because I don't know how you see it, but I feel like there's still a lot of trading on price. So I mean, some people want really the higher quality projects, but a lot
Mm.
is to say one carbon credit is one carbon credit, and it's exactly, it's kind of the same. So I think, and it's not. So that's
No,
definitely.
no, that's simply not true. A
Yeah,
ton
yeah,
is not a ton. You
yeah.
have to yeah, look into each project individually,
Mhm.
basically.
Yes.
Um,
No,
you
no, no.
can't,
What I wanted to say is that a lot of companies might just say, okay, we are carbon neutral with the cheapest credits or with cheaper credits, and it kind of gets the same effect from a marketing standpoint than using more expensive credits. Or would you say that is generally not true, or how is your feeling about that?
I mean, there are a lot of companies and entities by now that know what they knew, what they're doing, who that invest also in sustainability departments and have a more deeper insight into the market. So I think there's a lot of progress that has been made, and that's also why a lot of corporations are interested in high quality carbon removal credits. But I mean, there are also a lot of corporations that just don't have the capacity to do this and or to dive into this. So of course, for them, like a ton of CO2 that you buy on the market, it's a ton of CO2. You judge according to the price, and I mean, if you want to have a layer of security, you buy a gold standard or
Yes.
a verified carbon project. But I mean, that's it. Like that's basically you in that sense, they trust the standards, but they don't really look deep into the project itself because they just also don't have the capacity. And also not every corporation has the margin to buy like such expensive credits in order to compensate their entire carbon footprint. So I would also, again, speaking personally, always recommend like to invest into a portfolio of different solutions if you want to compensate your remaining emissions. And you also mentioned the term climate neutrality, which, from my point of view, is a really difficult term to use because then again, I would you like on the one end you have the issue with the credits and the like varying quality of the credits, which we also realize can vary drastically. And on the other end is what has been calculated for your carbon footprint. It's a scope 1, 2, if they include scope 3 emissions,
Yes.
what kind of indirect emissions did they include? There's no unified standard. There's a greenhouse gas protocol, which you can use in order to calculate your carbon footprint, which is basically also state of the art. And then also the requirements of the label itself for climate neutrality, they differ quite a lot in what they demand. So also in that sense, if you compensate your carbon footprint, I mean, it can mean something entirely different right now. There's no unified standard. And so you really have to tackle this issue from both ends to be really, yeah, to name yourself climate neutral. Hmm.
What would you say would need to change to make it easier or more transparent, or what would you like to see changing in this topic, in this space?
I mean, particularly for the name or for the label climate neutrality, it should have a clear definition. Like what needs to be in the carbon footprint in terms of course, scope 1 and 2, and then also indirect emissions. So that has to be a fixed value for everyone, a fixed framework. And then on the other hand, I think every corporation that also wants to claim climate neutrality needs a reduction path and like a path to compensation. And that shouldn't be just emission avoidances, but also carbon removals. And only if these parts are in place, like, I mean, we can start about, I actually prefer the term net zero, but also then climate neutrality. So yeah, there should be, yeah, a clear definition of what does it entail and what needs to be done. I mean, science-based targets are already doing this, so to some extent, and I think that's a good direction already that a lot of companies are taking by participating in the Science-Based Targets initiative.
So a clear standard for everybody is the way forward, or at least a step forward.
Exactly, yeah.
Because at the moment, right now, it's a bit of a free for all. And
Yeah, I mean, we are in a voluntary carbon market, so it's, to some extent, a little bit, Wild West,
yes.
but, you also have a lot of good initiatives, for example, such as science-based targets, and I think that's the way to go,
Mhm.
if you as long as you don't have governmental regulations or a government-regulated market.
Yeah, the voluntary carbon market is a bit of a wild west. But what are you seeing in general in the voluntary carbon markets in the 2 years that you have been, or is it 2 years around that you have been inside
No,
of
it's
that?
1.5 years
1.5
actually. No.
years. Okay.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing personally, and from a business standpoint, what is changing? What is staying the same? I do, because I feel like at the moment, also for me personally, the interest is getting bigger. I think the
Mm.
last year and the year before that was quite the interest peak, and right now it is still growing from the interest standpoint, and everybody wants to participate because the carbon price did go
Mhm.
a lot higher in the compliance markets. And now the question is, how would that change the voluntary carbon market? What would you personally see from being inside?
Um, I mean, there's the demand side, and they are like, demand is definitely growing constantly at the moment. There's regulatory pressure coming up
Mhm,
also on the EU level, on the EU Commission level. So I think at least until 2030, demand will just keep increasing.
mhm,
But then again, that's my personal projection. I'm not speaking for the company here. Um, and from a supply side, like, we have the availability. For example, now I'm speaking about biochar again. Technology is available. We have the biomass, so also there we can significantly scale. So I think both supply and demand are growing and will be growing in the future. It's just, we need to be careful, that we don't create a straw fire, so to say, that we carefully scale the supply, keep the quality of the projects, include co-benefits, have proper application of the biochar, for example, and so that we can also improve soil environment and water retention capacity. It's very much necessary also to look at the co-benefits and the entire project. So I mean, I have the little bit the fear that also with other players coming on the market, they won't properly account for the entire life cycle anymore, of a project, and just see, there's a technology, I can make money with it. I think about how the biochar is being applied later. Um, so it's right now it's all about working together with with standards such as the European Biochar Certificate or the Verified Carbon Standard, to have a proper procedure that most players or all players have a buy to, and then carefully scale the market project by project, where we look at the entire project life cycle.
mhm. So also is that also a goal for your company to scale up the process, the business
Yeah, of
for
course, but
2022, for example?
I mean, we will scale like
Mhm,
probably in 3, 4, 5 times the
mhm.
amount we had last year, which was the first year where we were really operative.
Nice.
But then again, we still need to make sure that the environmental integrity of each project is given. So we might even be able to scale more than that, but that's
Mhm,
basically the limit of scaling capacity that we can do by still, you know, have the scrutiny for each project that we wanna have.
mhm. What else is there anything else coming up with the company? Anything uh, new, exciting announcements, or what could you disclose?
I mean, there are a lot of exciting corporations that are coming up. For example, we have the India project with together with Klarna,
Hmm.
which is our first big biochar project outside of Europe and the United States.
Hmm.
And also like some new purchase agreements we just signed on the buyer side.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, I'm not allowed to disclose any of these at this
Yes,
point
no
because
problem.
they haven't been made public.
Yeah.
But it's pretty exciting in terms of volumes and
Hmm.
also like projects are happening like all around the world at the moment. We get inquiries from yeah United States, Latin America, even Singapore,
Okay, wow.
and yeah, so it's becoming a global market, which is pretty exciting for us.
Mhm. Just talk about quickly, maybe how do you choose which project, especially from the production side, which projects you work with? Is there any mechanism, or what is your mechanism basically, or what is your decision criteria, which project you take on?
Mm. I mean, there's usually we have an introduction. We look at the pyrolysis technology
Hmm.
and the input biomass they're using. So we prefer projects that where we can really ensure that the used biomass is a waste or can be considered a waste or at least byproduct, just otherwise incinerated. Because then you basically have the highest level of avoided emissions, which we don't even account in our calculations. And then, of course, the technology should be sound. There we have our ecosystem where we get regular advice on the if a new technology is coming up onto the systems. So we can make a judgment based on this. And of course, also the proposed end use, if it has social benefits. Our projects in India, for example, there the biochar is the idea is to use it to yeah, really improve heavily degraded lands, which is a huge social and economic benefits for the smallholder farmers there. And then, of course, the entry hurdle is the EVC certification,
Hmm.
which they are doing a technical audit. Um, and you also have the lab analysis of the biochar. And I mean, if the biochar doesn't fulfill the required criteria in terms of do no harm principle, of course, then we wouldn't also onboard the project. And yeah, each producer has to do a life cycle analysis and measure its emissions. And only if these keystones are in place, so to say, then we onboard the project and start tracking the individual deliveries.
Nice. Just quickly, could you talk a bit about your platform? Because I just basically read this has to do with blockchain technology, and everybody likes blockchain technology at the moment. So maybe a quick word about your platform, how it works, what makes it special, or
Yeah. Sure, I can tell you a little bit about the blockchain. Um, I'm not the blockchain expert myself, but I
yes.
will give you all the insights I can. I mean, I already told you about the data points that we are tracking,
Hmm.
basically from EBC certification until its end use. Each of these data points are safe on the blockchain immutably. And once we issue the certificate, we also can change these data points in hindsight.
Hmm.
So it's basically another layer of trust
Yeah.
that ensures, that there can be no misconduct on our side. And then now in the future, we will also use the third-party registry from the European Biochar certificate. So we have the data points on our own blockchain, and certificate on our registry, but also on the third-party EBC registry. So we have an independent registry. We have the data on the blockchain, which can be changed in hindsight. Basically, the major purpose of the blockchain is to create additional trust.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah. No, really nice. Yeah. So I have basically, I think my questions a bit covered. I would like you to, maybe talk a bit where people can find your company, where they can look if they want to work with you or just interested. Maybe a quick shout out.
I mean, they can go onto our platform directly, which is carbonfuture.earth.
Mm-hmm.
We are present on LinkedIn. This is one of our major channels for marketing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And people also are very welcome to reach out to me directly. My email address is marcel@carbonfuture.earth.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if there are any remaining questions, I will try to answer them if I find the time as soon as possible.
If you find the time. Okay, well,
Yeah, we are
sorry.
very busy, right? We are very busy.
Yes.
We also got a lot of new staff on board.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we are back to being able to answer every inquiry within 1 or 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, before the end of the year, we were somewhat understaffed,
Mm-hmm.
and now we really have grown and have a strong team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're still quite busy, which is a good sign
It's a good sign, right?
because
So
means
better than
more
not
CO2
being busy.
expected from the atmosphere. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, Marcel, I want to thank you very much for this quick chat about the carbon market. Maybe in a time we'll do it again and you give us some updates or so. I would thank the audience and yeah, see you next time, I guess.